Jack Hardy loved the serenity of his lakefront property. Nestled just outside the boundaries of the nearby Oak Ridge Lakes community, his modest yet charming home had been in his family for generations. Every morning he'd sit on the wooden dock with a cup of coffee in hand, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the shore. The lake was his sanctuary, a place where memories of his grandparents teaching him to fish, his father building the dock by hand, and family barbecues on summer evenings came alive. The property was his pride and joy, and most importantly, it was his, far from the meddling rules and politics of the neighboring homeowner association. The first sign of trouble came on an ordinary Thursday morning. Jack was tending to his garden when the postman arrived with an envelope marked "You Urgent" from the Oak Ridge Lakes Homeowners Association. Jack frowned as he opened it, expecting some kind of mistake. After all, he wasn't part of the homeowner association and had always made it a point to keep it that way. The letter, signed by Jennifer Sherman, the homeowner association president, was both confusing and alarming. It claimed that his property had recently been annexed into the homeowner association's jurisdiction and that he was now responsible for paying back dues, which amounted to a staggering $4,500. The letter also included a warning: failure to pay within 30 days would result in the loss of his lake access privileges. Jack chuckled bitterly, crumpling the letter in his hand. "What nonsense," he muttered to himself. He had no intention of paying a penny to an organization he didn't belong to, much less surrendering his right to access the lake that had been in his family for decades. Certain it was some sort of clerical error, he decided to call the homeowner association office to clear things up. The phone call, however, only added to his frustration. When he finally got through to Jennifer Sherman, her tone was curt and condescending. "Mr. Hardy," she began, "I assure you this is no mistake. The Oak Ridge Lakes community recently voted to expand its jurisdiction, and your property now falls within our boundaries. This means you are subject to all homeowner association rules and fees." Jack could hardly believe his ears. "Expand your jurisdiction? You can't just decide that my land is yours. This property has been in my family for generations, and we've never been part of the homeowner association." Jennifer's voice grew colder. "Mr. Hardy, the annexation was legal and approved by the county. If you have any issues, I suggest you take them up with the board. But I warn you, failure to comply will have consequences." Jack hung up, his hands trembling with anger. He knew Jennifer by reputation, a woman notorious for her authoritarian approach to running the homeowner association. Residents of Oak Ridge Lakes often whispered about her heavy-handed tactics, from issuing fines for minor infractions to enforcing absurd rules like banning certain colors of garden flowers. But this? Annexing private property? Jack was certain she'd crossed a line. Over the next few days, Jack tried to brush off the incident, convincing himself it would blow over. But then the second letter arrived, this time stamped with "Final Notice." It reiterated the demand for payment and added a new layer of threat. Failure to pay would result in legal action and the immediate revocation of his lake access. Enclosed was a photocopy of a document purportedly showing the legal annexation of his property into the homeowner association. Jack's stomach churned as he examined the paperwork. It was filled with jargon and signatures he didn't recognize, but one thing was clear: Jennifer had filed this with the county, making it official in the eyes of the local government. Jack decided it was time to dig deeper. He drove down to the county registrar's office, a small, cluttered building filled with rows of filing cabinets and the faint smell of old paper. After hours of searching through public records, he found the annexation documents. To his dismay, they seemed legitimate, but something didn't sit right. The signatures of neighboring property owners who had supposedly agreed to the annexation were unfamiliar, and the description of his property included errors, such as the wrong lot size and an outdated address. Jack's instincts told him something shady was at play. That weekend, Jack's frustration turned to fury when he discovered a no trespassing sign nailed to a post at the entrance to his dock. A heavy padlock had been placed on the gate leading to the water, and the dock itself was littered with buoys and markers labeled "Reserved for Oak Ridge Lakes Homeowner Association Members Only." Jack's peaceful sanctuary had been violated, and he was livid. Storming into the Oak Ridge Lakes Community Center, Jack demanded to speak to Jennifer Sherman. The receptionist, a young woman who looked uncomfortable with the confrontation, reluctantly led him to a conference room where Jennifer sat with 2 other board members. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, Jennifer radiated smug confidence as Jack entered the room. "Mr. Hardy," she said, barely looking up from her laptop, "I assume you're here to settle your dues?" "Settle my dues?" Jack shot back, his voice rising. "I'm here to tell you to take your signs, your padlocks, and your ridiculous demands and get off my property." Jennifer raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Mr. Hardy, you're mistaken. That lake access point is now common property for the homeowner association. It was annexed along with your land, as per the legal documents you've no doubt reviewed." Jack slammed his fists on the table, causing the other board members to jump. "You think you can bully me into paying for something that's been mine for decades? This isn't over." Jennifer's smug smile faded, replaced by a steely glare. "You can take whatever action you deem necessary, Mr. Hardy, but I assure you, the homeowner association operates within the law." Jack stormed out, his heart pounding. He knew he couldn't let this stand. That night, sitting in his living room surrounded by old family photos and property records, Jack made a vow. He would fight back with everything he had. This wasn't just about money or lake access. This was about preserving his family's legacy and standing up to a system that thought it could steamroll over people like him. Little did Jennifer Sherman know she had picked the wrong man to mess with. The morning after Jack's encounter with the Oak Ridge Lakes Homeowner Association, he sat at his kitchen table staring at the photocopied annexation document. His coffee had gone cold, untouched, as he pored over the legal jargon that had been deliberately crafted to confuse an ordinary person. His frustration simmered with every line he read. He didn't need to be a lawyer to see that something was deeply wrong. The signatures on the document, allegedly from neighboring property owners, were completely unfamiliar to him, and the descriptions of his property were riddled with inaccuracies. For one, the listed square footage was incorrect, and the address was an older version that hadn't been used in years. It was sloppy work, and yet it had somehow been filed with the county registrar's office and stamped as official. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Jennifer Sherman was behind this entire mess. He'd heard the stories, how she'd fined residents for leaving their rubbish bins out a few hours too long, or demanded expensive home repairs over trivial violations like faded paint. Her name was practically synonymous with greed and micromanagement, but this was on another level. It was one thing to enforce ridiculous rules on people who had willingly joined the homeowner association. It was another thing entirely to target someone who wasn't even part of their jurisdiction. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Jack decided to visit the county registrar's office again. The first visit had been a whirlwind, and he knew he'd need more time to examine the records thoroughly. He gathered every piece of documentation he could find related to his property. Deeds, tax records, even an old survey map his father had kept in a dusty filing cabinet. Armed with these papers, he drove to the registrar's office, a nondescript brick building with a faded sign above the entrance. Inside, the air smelled faintly of musty paper and coffee, and the rows of filing cabinets seemed endless. Jack approached the front desk, where a bored-looking clerk sat typing on an ancient computer. "Morning," Jack said, forcing a polite tone despite his frustration. "I need to look at property records for Oak Ridge Lakes and the surrounding area, specifically anything related to annexation." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Annexation, huh? That's not something we see every day. You'll want to start with the zoning files. They're in the back, aisle 7. You can't take anything out, but there's a copier if you need it. Jack nodded his thanks and made his way to the back of the room. The zoning files were stuffed into metal cabinets that groaned under the weight of decades' worth of paperwork. He started flipping through them, his eyes scanning for anything that mentioned his property. After nearly an hour of searching, he found the folder he was looking for. Inside was a stack of documents related to the recent annexation. As he read through them, his heart sank. The paperwork painted a picture of a smooth, lawful process, one where all affected property owners had supposedly agreed to join the homeowner association. It was a blatant lie, and Jack knew it. He'd never been consulted, let alone agreed to anything. But then, something caught his eye. One of the signatures on the annexation petition belonged to a John Hardy. Jack's jaw tightened. There was no John Hardy in the area, and he certainly hadn't signed anything. It was a clear case of forgery. His hands shook as he snapped a picture of the document with his phone. This wasn't just an overreach by the homeowner association. It was fraud. Emboldened by the discovery, Jack decided to dig deeper. He spent the rest of the day combing through related files, uncovering a trail of inconsistencies and irregularities. One document listed Jennifer Sherman as the acting agent for the annexation process, which meant she had personally overseen the entire operation. Another file revealed that the annexation had been rushed through the approval process, bypassing several standard procedures. It was clear Jennifer had used her position to manipulate the system for her own benefit. By the time Jack left the registrar's office, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. He felt a mix of anger and determination. Jennifer had crossed a line, and he wasn't going to let her get away with it. But he also knew he needed help. This was bigger than just one man's fight against a corrupt homeowner association president. It was a battle that would require legal expertise and community support. The next morning, Jack called his lawyer, an old friend named Paul Benson. Paul had helped him with minor legal issues in the past, but this was a different beast altogether. Over the phone, Jack explained the situation in detail, describing the forged signatures, the fraudulent documents, and the illegal annexation. Paul listened carefully, occasionally interrupting with questions to clarify the timeline. "This is serious, Jack," Paul said when Jack finished. "If what you're saying is true, Jennifer Sherman could be in a lot of trouble. Forgery and fraud are criminal offenses, not to mention the civil liability she'd face for stealing your property." "I'm not looking to ruin anyone's life," Jack replied, though his tone betrayed his anger. "I just want my property back, and for this nonsense to stop." "Fair enough," Paul said, "but if we're going to fight this, we need more evidence. The documents you've found so far are a good start, but we'll need eyewitness testimony, financial records, and anything else that proves Jennifer's wrongdoing." Jack agreed and spent the next week gathering as much information as he could. He spoke to neighbors, some of whom shared their own horror stories about Jennifer's tactics. One couple revealed that they'd been fined thousands of dollars for having the wrong type of mailbox, while another resident claimed Jennifer had tried to force them to sell their home to a developer she was secretly working. The more Jack learned, the clearer it became that Jennifer wasn't just overzealous. She was actively exploiting her position for personal gain. Jack also reached out to local journalists, hoping to draw attention to the issue. One reporter from the town's newspaper expressed interest and agreed to meet Jack for an interview. They spent hours discussing the situation, and Jack provided copies of the forged documents and other evidence he'd collected. The reporter promised to look into the story further and publish an article exposing the homeowner association's corruption. Meanwhile, Paul began drafting a lawsuit against the homeowner association and Jennifer Sherman. The legal filing accused them of property theft, fraud, and defamation. It demanded the immediate return of Jack's property, compensation for damages, and an injunction to prevent the homeowner association from interfering with his land in the future. Paul warned Jack that the legal battle could be long and expensive, but Jack was undeterred. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every homeowner who'd been victimized by the homeowner association's abuses. As the weeks went by, the tension in the community grew. Word of Jack's lawsuit spread like wildfire, and residents began to take sides. Some supported Jack, seeing him as a hero standing up to an oppressive regime. Others sided with Jennifer, either out of loyalty or fear of retaliation. The homeowner association held an emergency meeting to address the growing unrest, but Jennifer dismissed Jack's accusations as baseless and accused him of trying to undermine the community. Jack, however, refused to back down. He continued to gather evidence, uncovering more and more proof of Jennifer's corruption. He found financial records showing that homeowner association funds had been used for personal expenses, including a luxury vacation Jennifer had taken under the guise of business travel. He also discovered that several board members had resigned in recent years, citing ethical concerns about Jennifer's leadership. The turning point came when Jack's story was published in the local newspaper. The article, titled "Lakefront Property Owner Fights Back Against Homeowner Association Corruption," detailed the fraudulent annexation and exposed Jennifer's history of unethical behavior. It included interviews with other residents who had suffered under her rule, painting a damning picture of her leadership. The story sparked outrage in the community, and calls for Jennifer's resignation grew louder. For Jack, the article was a validation of his efforts. He knew the battle was far from over, but he finally felt like he was making progress. As he stood on his dock, looking out at the lake that had been the backdrop to so many memories, he vowed to see the fight through to the end. This wasn't just about property rights, it was about standing up to injustice and protecting the place he called home. The day Jack's lawsuit was officially filed, a storm brewed, both literally and figuratively. Heavy gray clouds hung low over the town, mirroring the tension that had been building in the Oak Ridge Lakes community. Jack stood in his kitchen, staring at the freshly printed legal documents his lawyer Paul had sent over for review. The stack of papers was thick, filled with damning evidence against Jennifer Sherman and her reign of control. Yet Jack knew this was only the beginning. The legal battle ahead would be grueling, and he was prepared for Jennifer to fight back with everything she had. A week after the lawsuit became public knowledge, Jack received a knock on his door. It was one of his neighbors, Ellen Stanley, a middle-aged woman who'd lived in the area for over 2 decades. Ellen looked nervous as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clutching a folder tightly to her chest. "Jack," she began hesitantly, "I heard about your case. I just wanted to say, I think what you're doing is brave. I know a lot of people are scared to stand up to Jennifer, but someone had to do it." Jack invited her inside, and over a cup of tea, Ellen opened up about her own experiences with the homeowner association. She told him how Jennifer had fined her for planting a flower bed that was too bright and had tried to pressure her into repainting her house a dull beige to fit the community aesthetic. Ellen reached into her folder and pulled out copies of the fines she had received, as well as emails from Jennifer that bordered on harassment. "She's a bully," Ellen said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "She thinks she can control everyone. But you've given people like me hope. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know." Jack thanked her and promised to pass her evidence along to Paul. Ellen's visit gave him a boost of confidence, but it also reminded him of the stakes. This wasn't just about his lakefront property anymore. It was about holding Jennifer accountable for the countless residents she had wronged. As the weeks went on, Jack and Paul worked tirelessly to build their case. They subpoenaed financial records from the homeowner association and uncovered a web of mismanagement and corruption. Jennifer had used homeowner association funds to pay for lavish dinners, spa treatments, and even a private yacht rental, all under the guise of business expenses. She had also funneled money into a separate account that she controlled exclusively, a clear violation of homeowner association regulations. Meanwhile, Jack's story continued to gain attention. The local newspaper published follow-up articles detailing the extent of Jennifer's misconduct, and a local news station ran a segment on the growing scandal. Jack found himself becoming an unlikely hero in the community, with more and more residents coming forward to share their stories. Some provided testimony about Jennifer's predatory behavior, while others contributed documents and emails that painted a damning picture of her leadership. Jennifer, however, was not one to back down easily. She responded to the lawsuit with a counterclaim, accusing Jack of defamation and claiming that his false accusations were damaging her reputation. Her lawyer, a slick and aggressive man named Roger Graham, issued a statement to the press calling Jack a disgruntled property owner who was attempting to undermine the integrity of the homeowner association. The counterclaim only fueled Jack's determination. He knew the truth was on his side, and he refused to let Jennifer intimidate him. Paul assured him that the defamation claim was baseless and would likely be thrown out in court, but it was clear that Jennifer was willing to play dirty. As the court date approached, tensions in the community reached a boiling point. The homeowner association held a town hall meeting to address the growing unrest, and Jack decided to attend. The meeting was held in the community center, a modest building with rows of folding chairs and a small stage at the front. The room was packed with residents, some of whom whispered nervously as Jack entered. Jennifer stood at the podium, her expression calm but her eyes cold. She opened the meeting with a prepared speech, dismissing the allegations against her as sensationalized nonsense and insisting that the homeowner association had always acted in the best interests of the community. Her words were met with polite applause from a small group of loyal supporters, but the majority of the room remained silent. When it was Jack's turn to speak, he stood up and addressed the crowd with a steady voice. He explained the fraudulent annexation of his property, the forged signatures, and the financial mismanagement he had uncovered. He spoke about the residents who had been harassed, fined, and bullied by Jennifer's regime, and he urged them to stand together against the corruption. "This isn't just about me," Jack said, his voice rising with passion. "This is about all of us. We deserve better than this. We deserve a community that's built on trust, fairness, and respect, not fear and control." The room erupted into applause, and for the first time, Jack felt the full weight of the community's support. People began to voice their own complaints, demanding answers from Jennifer and her board. Jennifer's calm facade began to crack, and she quickly adjourned the meeting, retreating from the podium as the crowd grew increasingly vocal. In the days that followed, several board members resigned, citing their dissatisfaction with Jennifer's leadership. One former member, Susan Green, reached out to Jack and offered to testify on his behalf. Susan revealed that Jennifer had pressured the board into approving the annexation of Jack's property, threatening them with removal if they didn't comply. She also provided minutes from board meetings that showed Jennifer's blatant disregard for proper procedures. The mounting evidence against Jennifer was overwhelming, and by the time the trial began, it was clear that she was in serious trouble. The courtroom was packed with spectators, many of whom were residents of Oak Ridge Lakes, eager to see justice served. Jack sat beside Paul at the plaintiff's table, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. The trial lasted several days, with witnesses testifying about Jennifer's misconduct and fraudulent activities. Paul presented the forged annexation documents, the financial records showing embezzlement, and the testimony of former board members who had been coerced into silence. Jennifer's lawyer tried to discredit the evidence, but his arguments were weak in the face of such overwhelming proof. In the end, the judge ruled decisively in Jack's favor. Jennifer was ordered to return Jack's property and pay restitution for the damages she had caused. She was also removed from her position as homeowner association president and faced criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. The courtroom erupted into cheers as the verdict was read, and Jack felt a wave of relief and triumph wash over him. Outside the courthouse, Jack was met with applause from a crowd of supporters. Ellen was among them, smiling through tears as she hugged him tightly. "You did it, Jack," she said. "You stood up to her, and you won." Jack nodded, feeling a sense of pride and gratitude. He knew the battle had taken a toll, but it had also brought the community together in a way he hadn't thought possible. As he returned to his lakefront property that evening, he stood on the dock and looked out at the water, feeling a renewed sense of peace. The lake was his once more, and the fight to protect it had reminded him of the power of resilience, determination, and standing up for what was right. The days after Jack's court victory were marked by relief and celebration, But as the initial adrenaline of the win faded, the lingering consequences of Jennifer Sherman's actions began to surface. Jack might have reclaimed his property, but the scars of the battle remained, and the fractured Oak Ridge Lakes community faced an uphill battle to rebuild trust and heal from the turmoil caused by Jennifer's reign. Jack returned home to his lakefront property, determined to restore it to its former peace. The dock, which had been littered with "Reserved for Homeowner Association Members Only" signs, was finally free of its padlocks and buoys. Yet, as Jack walked along its wooden planks, he noticed the subtle damage that months of neglect and misuse had inflicted. The boards creaked under his weight, some warped and splintered from water exposure. He sighed, realizing that just as he would repair the dock, the neighborhood too needed mending. The fallout from the trial sent shockwaves through the homeowner association. Jennifer's removal as president left a void in leadership, and the remaining board members scrambled to stabilize the organization. Many residents, emboldened by Jack's victory, began to openly question the homeowner association's purpose and the legitimacy of some of its rules. Tensions bubbled at every turn. Some saw the homeowner association as a necessary evil, while others believed it had become a corrupt institution that needed to be dismantled entirely. Despite wanting nothing more than to distance himself from the homeowner association, Jack was drawn back into the fray. Ellen Stanley visited him one afternoon, carrying a petition for a special election to reform the board. "Jack, people look up to you now," she said, placing the petition on his kitchen table. "Your fight inspired the whole community. We need someone like you to help us rebuild this mess." Jack shook his head, reluctant. "Ellen, I've spent months fighting them. The last thing I want is to get dragged into their politics." Ellen leaned forward, her expression earnest. "It's not about politics, Jack. It's about making sure this never happens again. People are fed up, and we need someone who's proven they'll stand up for what's right." The petition already had dozens of signatures, and despite his reservations, Jack couldn't ignore the weight of the responsibility placed on his shoulders. Over the following days, neighbors stopped by to thank him for his efforts, some even calling him a hero. It wasn't a title he was comfortable with, but their gratitude was genuine. Eventually, after much deliberation, Jack agreed to help organize the election, though he made it clear he wasn't interested in running for office himself. As the special election loomed, the community held a series of open forums to discuss the future of the homeowner association. Jack attended every meeting, not as a candidate, but as a concerned homeowner who wanted to ensure transparency and fairness. The forums were chaotic at first, with residents airing years of pent-up grievances. One man complained about being fined for using non-approved curtains, while a woman described how Jennifer had tried to force her to sell her home to developers. But amidst the anger, there was a growing sense of unity, a shared desire to turn a new page. Jack became an informal leader, guiding the discussions and mediating conflicts. His calm demeanor and focus on solutions earned him respect from even those who had been skeptical of his fight against the homeowner association. Under his guidance, the community began drafting new rules aimed at limiting the board's power and preventing future abuses. They proposed term limits for board members, stricter financial oversight, and a requirement for major decisions to be approved by a majority vote of the residents. Meanwhile, Jennifer Sherman's downfall continued to unfold. The criminal charges against her gained traction as more evidence of her embezzlement and fraud came to light. News outlets reported that she had siphoned thousands of dollars from the homeowner association's budget to fund her lavish lifestyle, including vacations, spa treatments, and designer clothing. Former board members who had been complicit in her schemes began cooperating with investigators, eager to distance themselves from the scandal. It wasn't long before Jennifer's name became synonymous with corruption, and any remaining defenders she had quickly fell silent. Jack's role in exposing Jennifer's actions also attracted attention from outside the community. A regional newspaper published an in-depth feature on the case, framing it as a cautionary tale about unchecked power in homeowners associations. The article highlighted Jack's perseverance and painted him as an everyman who stood up to injustice. Strangers from neighboring towns sent letters of support, some sharing their own stories of homeowner association abuses and asking for advice on how to fight back. Despite the attention, Jack remained focused on his own community. The special election arrived on a sunny Saturday morning, with residents gathering at the community center to cast their votes. The atmosphere was a mix of hope and nervous energy as people debated which candidates would bring about the change they so desperately wanted. By the end of the day, a new board had been elected, composed of individuals who had pledged to prioritize fairness, transparency, and the well-being of the community over personal agendas. Jack felt a sense of relief as he watched the newly elected board hold their first meeting. Ellen Stanley, who had campaigned on a platform of reform, was chosen as the new president. She immediately announced plans to audit the homeowner association's finances, review all current rules, and hold a series of workshops to educate residents on their rights. Jack knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in months, he felt hopeful about the future of Oak Ridge Lakes. In the weeks that followed, Jack returned to his routine, focusing on repairing his property and enjoying the peace of the lake. He spent long afternoons sanding and staining the dock, replacing damaged boards, and planting flowers along the shoreline. The work was therapeutic, a reminder of why he had fought so hard to protect his land. Occasionally, neighbors would stop by to chat or offer a helping hand, further strengthening the sense of community that had emerged from the ordeal. One evening, as the sun set over the water, Jack sat on the dock with a cup of coffee, reflecting on everything that had happened. The lake glimmered in shades of orange and gold, its surface calm and undisturbed. For the first time in months, Jack felt a profound sense of peace. He had stood up to a corrupt system, reclaimed his property, and helped his neighbors take back control of their community. While the scars of the battle would always remain, they served as a testament to his resilience and determination. As Jack watched the ripples on the water, a thought crossed his mind. Sometimes the fight for justice isn't just about the outcome. It's about the courage to stand up and say, "Enough is enough." In that moment, Jack knew he had done the right thing, not just for himself, but for everyone who called Oak Ridge Lakes home. And as the first stars began to appear in the evening sky, Jack allowed himself to smile, knowing that brighter days lay ahead for his community. The quiet days following the special election brought a sense of normalcy that Jack hadn't felt in months. The chaos surrounding Jennifer Sherman and the Oak Ridge Lakes Homeowner Association began to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism among the residents. The new board, led by Ellen Stanley, moved swiftly to implement the reforms promised during the election campaign. For the first time in years, the community felt a glimmer of trust in its leadership. Yet, for Jack, the journey wasn't over. There were loose ends to tie up, and the weight of everything he had endured still lingered heavily on his shoulders. The first order of business for the new Homeowner Association board was to audit the organization's finances. Ellen made transparency her top priority, and within weeks, the findings from the audit were made public. The numbers were staggering. Jennifer Sherman had embezzled over $80,000 from homeowner association funds, funneled into personal accounts under the guise of operational expenses. The report detailed extravagant purchases, including first-class flights, high-end electronics, and a luxury car lease. Residents were appalled, but they were also relieved to finally have clarity. Ellen announced that the board would work with law enforcement to recover the stolen funds and use them to repair neglected communal facilities, like the playground and the community pool. Jack, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines, proud of what the community was achieving, but eager to retreat to the peace of his lakeside home. He spent his days finishing the restoration of his dock, planting a row of hydrangeas along the shoreline, and enjoying the sound of the water lapping against the shore. Yet, despite his best efforts to move on, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was unresolved. Jennifer Sherman's trial loomed on the horizon, and Jack knew his testimony would play a critical role in ensuring she faced justice. When the trial began, it reignited the tensions that had gripped the community for months. The courthouse was packed with reporters, residents, and curious onlookers. Jennifer, once the untouchable queen of the Oak Ridge Lakes Homeowner Association, now sat at the defendant's table, her demeanor markedly different from the confident, authoritative figure she had once been. Her lawyer, Roger Graham, had a reputation for aggressive tactics, and Jack braced himself for a contentious battle. Jack's turn to testify came on the third day of the trial. As he took the stand, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him, including Jennifer's sharp glare. Paul had prepared him well, and Jack spoke calmly and clearly, recounting the fraudulent annexation of his property and the emotional toll it had taken on him. He presented the forged documents and described the lengths Jennifer had gone to in order to maintain her grip on power. The prosecution followed up by calling former board members and residents to testify, each adding their own accounts of Jennifer's misconduct. Roger Graham attempted to discredit Jack during cross-examination, suggesting that he had exaggerated the harm caused by the annexation and accusing him of seeking attention. Jack remained composed, countering each accusation with facts and refusing to be rattled. By the time he stepped down from the stand, it was clear that Jennifer's defense was crumbling. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and the jury's expressions betrayed their growing disdain for her actions. The trial lasted 2 weeks, culminating in a guilty verdict on all counts. Jennifer was sentenced to several years in prison for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery, and she was ordered to pay restitution to the homeowner association and individual residents she had wronged. The courtroom erupted in applause as the sentence was read, and Jack felt a profound sense of closure. Justice had been served, not just for him, but for the entire community. With the trial behind him, Jack finally allowed himself to breathe. The tension that had consumed his life for months began to dissipate, and he turned his focus fully to the future. Ellen and the new board continued their efforts to rebuild trust within the community, hosting town hall meetings, social events, and volunteer projects to bring residents together. Slowly but surely, Oak Ridge Lakes began to heal. Jack's role in the community shifted as well. Though he had no desire to join the board, he became a trusted advisor to Ellen and the other members, offering his insights and helping to mediate disputes. Residents often sought him out for advice, whether it was about homeowner association issues or simply life in general. Jack found himself forming connections he hadn't expected, and for the first time, he felt truly at home in the community he had once kept at arm's length. One sunny afternoon, months after the trial, Jack hosted a small gathering at his lakefront property. Neighbors and friends arrived with food, drinks, and lawn chairs, filling the air with laughter and conversation. The dock, now fully restored, became the focal point of the celebration, with children running along its length and adults relaxing by the water. Ellen raised a glass to toast Jack, thanking him for his courage and resilience. "Without you," she said, "none of this would have been possible." Jack smiled, a mix of pride and humility washing over him. He looked around at the faces of his neighbors, people who had once been strangers but were now friends. The lake sparkled in the afternoon sun, its surface calm and inviting, a symbol of the peace they had all worked so hard to achieve. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the water, Jack stood at the edge of the dock, watching the reflection of the stars begin to emerge. He thought about everything that had brought him to this moment: the battles fought, the injustices exposed, and the relationships forged. He realized that while the fight had been difficult, it had also been transformative. He had found a sense of purpose, not just in defending his property, but in standing up for what was right and inspiring others to do the same. Jack's journey wasn't just a story of reclaiming land. It was a testament to the power of resilience, community, and the courage to challenge injustice. As the sounds of laughter and music drifted across the lake, Jack felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The lake was his once more, but it was also a place that belonged to everyone who had fought alongside him, a shared symbol of their collective strength and determination. And so, as the stars reflected on the water and the voices of his friends echoed into the night, Jack felt a profound sense of peace. His fight was over, and his future was bright. The lake, with all its beauty and history, would forever remain a reminder of what could be achieved when people stood together, determined to protect what mattered most.